Blog Talk Radio.
Alternative facts.
The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. At 12:07 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, numerous unidentified objects of unknown intent and unknown origin were detected at high altitudes over multiple locations of Earth's outer space by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, and these objects are presumed to be some form of controlled aircraft. It is not known if more of these aircraft will arrive, or if they will attempt entering Earth's atmosphere. United States citizens are encouraged to monitor local media outlets, as more updates will follow as information becomes available. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. Attacks by the undead have been reported in several states across the country. The dead are rising from their graves and are attacking the human race. At this time, it is expected that more attacks of this nature will occur in several other states in the next few hours. The intent behind their attack is unknown at this time. He has been observed that a bike or exchange of fluids is a method of transmission. This is an extremely dangerous situation if they crave the taste of human flesh. It is not known whether this event will last for hours, days, or even longer. Stay calm, as authorities have been dispatched to deal with these creatures. An all-clear siren will be sounded when this situation is under control. Pacific Standard Time, nor is detected a long-range nuclear missile launching. This missile is believed to be headed in the direction of all residents within a 400-mile radius of this area should seek a fallout shelter immediately.
Welcome to Within the Chaos with your host, Rodney Shortridge, and co-host, Robin Dalton.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. You can listen in by going to blogtalkradio.com/Within the Chaos, or listen in by phone. You can dial 323-870-4197, and you can also call in to ask questions to our guests at the same number, 323-870-4197. From deep within the heart of the Appalachians, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you all for listening to Within the Chaos. My name is Rodney Shortridge, and I'll be your host tonight, along with my fiery redhead co-host, Robin Dalton. Well, Robin ain't here right now. She's a little late, so we'll wait for her. Hey, y'all, when she gets here. Tonight, our special guest is Stephen Mehler. Stephen is an author and holds 3 degrees in sciences and is a trained field archaeologist and prehistorian. His fascination with ancient Egypt, which began at the age of 8, has guided his education and spiritual work all his life. I'd like to give a shout out to my cousins up in Ohio, Jennifer and Joe Shortridge of 222 Paranormal. If you get a chance, check out their talk show. You can find them on Facebook under 222 Paranormal. Also, the two beautiful and lovely ladies of Paranormal Party, the SOS Sisters of Salem, my amazing friends, Misty and Ashley Connor, the famous Connor sisters. If you get a chance, also check their talk show out, and you can find them also on Facebook under Paranormal Party. And since Robin's not here to tell us about her week, I'm just going to go straight in and introduce everybody again. And it's my honor and special welcome to our guest, Stephen Mehler. Hello, Stephen, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, Rodney, and it's good to be talking to you.
Excellent, sir. Well, like I said, I'm just going to dive in because I got a lot of questions. I mean, I know you're an encyclopedia of knowledge. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you started on your journey into the world of the ancient Egyptians?
Well, I'll give you the short version because the long version would take all night.
Oh, okay.
Well, like it said in the intro, it was around the age of 8 years old where I came upon a picture of the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid in an issue of National Geographic magazine, and it made a profound effect on me. It wasn't something that right away that's what I was going to do with my life, but it got me on a path of interest, and I began to search for answers for myself, and as you said, I got involved in the sciences, and it became a while that I feel that even the sciences didn't give me all the answers. I went on a spiritual path, got involved with the Rosicrucian Order, and eventually put it all together and became an archaeologist, Egyptologist, went to Egypt, and met an Egyptian teacher, and that led me on the path to where I'm at today. He and I actually created a new discipline.
So, did a technological advanced civilization, predate the Egyptians?
Yes, by thousands and thousands of years. And the evidence now is so overwhelming that we no longer actually call it a theory. I mean, it's a matter of people want to recognize what we're presenting or not. But the evidence is overwhelming. And this is something that's certainly not new. This has been by many different groups, such groups that have so-called secret societies like the Masons and the Rosicrucians, and other groups have maintained for years that there was something else going on there. And the real break began early in the 20th century when there were certain researchers who got involved in questioning what was the standard accepted field of Egyptology, that it just began around 5,000 years ago, and pyramids were tombs for kings, and there wasn't enough challenge until evidence could come in and the sciences were involved, and we challenge all of it now, and it's really within the last 30 to 40 years that the field has significantly changed, with many, many different alternative researchers now presenting the fact that there was very much advanced civilizations on this planet well over 12,000 years ago.
Fascinating. Well, I know you mentioned you had a special teacher. What was his name, and how did he help you? I guess have more understanding and learning of the ancient Egyptians.
Yes, well, there's an ancient saying that when the student is ready, the master will appear. I mean, I have regrets now that since he's passed that I didn't have more time with him. But it was a question that I had to go on my path. Like I said, went through the sciences. I got involved in archaeology, was trained in archaeology in 1974 by, at that time, one of the world's leading prehistorians, Professor Francois Borde of the University of Bordeaux, and he taught me archaeology. And so I was on this path for a long time until I got involved with the Rosicrucian Order in the late 70s and 80s. And there seemed to be something missing, that there was something else going on, and I found out through many different areas of my research that there was a tradition that still existed in Egypt, what we can call the oral tradition or the indigenous tradition, something that was beyond, before there was writing. And so one thing led to another, and I found out that there was a group that were leading tours to Egypt, and that they used a certain gentleman as a tour guide. I first heard his name in 1987, and they just said Hakim. His full name, when I first met him in 1992, is Abdel Hakim Awayan, Actually means in Arabic slave or servant to wisdom, and he was. And his family, named the Aryan family, was an ancient tribe. And so he was a unique man, and it was his teachings that really put it all together for me. And he and I formulated a whole new discipline. He used to have a saying that if you don't like the system, create your own. And that's what we did. That's basically what he did. He had gathered this information all his life, and he was a trained archaeologist, Egyptologist. He had dual degrees. He was academically trained in Egyptology, but he had spent his early life going all around Egypt and going to all the sites and meeting the old people at the sites who we now know, we call them the keepers, who know the esoteric information at every site. And he realized that there was something else way, way beyond than what he was taught in the field of Egyptology. And that is what is in my two books that I put out, Land of Osiris and From Light into Darkness, with his help, that we postulate that there was a highly advanced civilization that existed before what you could say before the flood, or before a cataclysmic event that occurred around 12,000 years ago. That they were the ones who built the pyramids. The pyramids were not tombs, they were machines. They created some of the incredible technology we see. And as I say, we have gathered over the last 20 years a numerous amount of physical hard evidence that there was this cataclysmic event, not just, of course, in Egypt, but worldwide. And it is recorded in the myths of over 250 different people on the planet. We know it in our Bible as the flood myth, as Noah and the flood. But it is a story that has existed in many people, and there was many different events, many different floods, if you will. But the event that we're talking about occurred around 12,000 years ago. And what we have is what we call a pre-cataclysmic civilization and post-cataclysmic. And we call this civilization, as Hakim gave it to us, not Egypt, because Egypt is based on a Greek word, but the ancient term was called Kemt or Kemet. And we spell it many different ways. Its spelling is not important. But it was Kemt or Kemt, K-M-T, and it later became Kemet. And so what we teach is Kemetology, not Egyptology.
Oh, okay. Well, excuse me. I heard and also read that Hakeem met the Grateful Dead. And what was his experience with meeting the Grateful Dead? And did Hakeem have any influence on music?
Oh yeah, well, this is one of my many famous Hakeem stories, which I have thousands of them. But this is a story. When I first went to Egypt in 1992, I said I had met in 1987. I got involved in other research, which is shown on a bio on your page, that I got involved in crystal skull research as an archaeologist and as a metaphysician, as a mystic too. And it was in my research in crystal skulls that I was going to be serving on a panel at the San Francisco Whole Life Expo in 1987. So when I was there, I met people who had a booth there. Their booth was a travel agency called Power Places Tours. They were the first group that was actually leading in the 80s, through the 90s, and through the 2000s, spiritual journeys, spiritual tours to Egypt. So I met the people that were working there, and I met the man who was also owned the company, named Dr. Toby Weiss, and we formed a mutual understanding and agreement, and he said that I had to come to Egypt with him because he was using a particular tour guide, and that's where I first heard his name, Hakim. So it wasn't until 5 years later, and it'll be 25 years this November. It's a special anniversary for me. November of 1992, I went to Egypt with Power Places Tours. Now, in there, I met a lady who was leading her own tour group, in part of the group I was involved with, named Nikki Scully. So her name, I will come back to her name. Nikki was leading a group. I connected with Nikki, and I worked with her group, and that's when I met Hakim, was in November of 1992. So to return to the story, Nikki Scully was married in the 70s to a man named Rock Scully. The Grateful Dead went to Egypt and put on a series of free concerts for the Egyptians. They actually put up a stage, a platform right in front of the Sphinx, and did 3 concerts. And I've actually been given a tape. It's on YouTube. If people Google it, they can actually see the concert that they did.
did. Sorry, everybody, but I think I lost him. But we'll get him back. I was sitting here listening through the headphones, and I'm like, where'd he go? Let me get myself plugged back up. Because I thought it was my headphones going out. Like, it better not be going out. I bought brand new ones. Let's try this again. Let's see here. We're getting back. Hang on. There he is.
Being a signal problem, I think.
Yeah, it happens. So that's what I was worried about with Skype. I thought it was my headphones because I got brand new headphones, and I'm like, where did he go? We lost him again. Let's see here. Maybe. Let's see. Maybe. Let's see. Yes, everybody. I type and talk. I'm gonna try to Skype him and see if that works. Let me find this. Let's see here. Sorry about it. Technical difficulties. You all know sometimes I have them. Let's see. Oh, no. I see he's back. We'll try it. Oh, no. He just disappeared again. Let's see. I don't think I can Skype him now. Won't let me do that. Well, that just sucks. Let's see here. Try that. Let's see. Yes, sorry about this, everybody. Yeah, you all understand it's radio, especially internet radio, and sometimes it just does not want to cooperate with you. And I hate it when it happens to a guest that has so much knowledge to tell us. But we'll get him. We'll get him back. Don't worry. Until then, you got me. And his research into the Egyptians is fascinating. I've always, ever since a kid, always been fascinated with Egyptian culture, the pyramids and so forth. Oh, I think he's back.
I am here. Yes, I am.
Oh, all right.
I'm on the phone. I guess old Bell telephone is the only reliable thing here.
Sometimes it happens.
Old-fashioned landline with all this technology. I'm telling you.
It blows my mind sometimes. It does. Some nights, great, no trouble. And then other nights, everything breaks down.
Yep. I know. Well, that usually is my case, so I'm not surprised.
Well, I'm glad you called back.
Okay. Where were we?
But you were talking about 1992 and how November of 1992 was really special to you.
Okay, that's when I first went to Egypt. So you wanted to know about the connection to the dead, so you probably didn't hear a whole bunch of what I said. So in 1992, I went to Egypt with a group called Power Places Tours. And on that tour group was a woman named Nikki Scully. And I connected with her, and that's where I first met Hakeem. As it turns out, Nikki Scully was married to a man named Rock Scully, who was the publicist for the Dead. So the Dead had gone to Egypt in 1978, and they put on a series of free concerts for the Egyptians. Platform, a stage right in front of the Sphinx, and played. And if people want to know, I've actually been sent a copy of it recently. It's on YouTube. So if people Google The Dead Egypt 1978, they can actually see some of that. Okay. So being the Dead, who they were, and this part probably didn't get heard too. They went to the local village, which is the village right next to the Giza Plateau. Well, that was Hakim's village. His family, the Awiyan family, was one of 4 families that founded that village in the early part of the 20th century. So they went around, and of course, being who they were, they said, who's the local wise man? Who's the wisest person around here? Oh, everybody pointed to Hakim's house. Go in there. And so that was the story. So I had heard this story. So I came back to Egypt in the early 2000s, and I sat down with him, and I'm asking him this story. And I always, at this time, I called him Papa. He was like my spiritual father. So I said to him, Papa, I heard that the Grateful Dead were in this house. He said, oh, yes, they were. And so I paused. And then I said, and this is key for everybody to know because today is 420. So then I'm going to continue on. So I said to him, Papa, you smoke shisha with the Grateful Dead? Now, for people who don't know, shisha is the water pipe that is smoked in Egypt. Usually when people go to Egypt and look around, they see most people are smoking tobacco. But, of course, in the houses and in other areas, they're smoking hashish with tobacco. That's where you get the word shisha pipe. So then I said to him, Papa, you smoke shisha with the Grateful Dead? And he said, yes, of course. Long pause. Then I said, Papa, you smoked shisha with Jerry Garcia? Pause. And then he says, yes. You mean the guitar player? That's all he was to him, was just a guitar player.
Wow.
But yes, the story is true. My master smoked shisha with the Grateful Dead, and they stayed with him for hours and hours and hours. And then there's more to the story, which is still yet to be revealed, but the story is, of course, that the Grateful Dead dropped acid and stayed up all night inside the Great Pyramid in the King's Chamber, where I have led people every year on our tours and have great experiences, life-changing experiences in the King's Chamber, the Great Pyramid. They stayed up all night, and supposedly Mickey Hart recorded it all, but has never released it. So someday, we hope he does.
Wow.
So that's that story. But there are many, many stories like that. Hakim did a personal tour in 1974 of give Henry Kissinger a tour of the Giza Plateau. So there were stories like that. But the kind of man he was, you could have been the king of the world and a beggar off the street. When you came into the house, you were equal to him. So that's why he would say, you mean the guitar player. I mean, not the idolization that we had of Jerry Garcia, of course.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yep.
So,
but that's the kind of man he was. And so I had with him a blessed 16-year journey, the last 16 years of his life. I was not the only disciple, only pupil. There are many others, and we're going to be doing a documentary about him soon, and hopefully some of these famous people will be in there. Greg Braden did tours with Hakim in the 80s, then Barbara Hand-Clow, then John Anthony West, and then other people, of course, Nikki Scully, and then myself at the end. I did tours with him, and we developed this discipline ourselves. So what we would do is when we take people out in the field is we show you the physical evidence, use both sides of the brain as he taught, and then we actually have an experience. Because the ancient people did not separate the spiritual and the material, physics and metaphysics. It was not separated. It was all one understanding. So there was not everything was sacred, everything the profane was sacred, the sacred was profane. Everything was that way to ancient people, and we could talk more about that because people want to know, did aliens build the Great Pyramids, of course, and all that. We addressed that subject. I addressed it in my first book, and it's a complicated subject because I tend to wind up being in the middle of both sides of the field because I certainly believe that we're not alone. I know we're not alone. I wouldn't say believe. And humanity, the human condition is something that just doesn't exist on this planet. It has existed on many different planets. But Hakim was always down on this subject because it would be an insult to our ancestors to say that we didn't have the capability to do these amazing things that we show. And that's always the answer. The criticism, people say, oh, no, we couldn't have did this precision and this technology in granite, the hardest materials on the planet. It had to be aliens. But yet we show that these ancient people who are us, ourselves, made mistakes. And so the answer that has come down when we show people in the field, well, if aliens did this, why did they make mistakes? And why did they leave mistakes around for us to find? It doesn't make sense. So Hakim was always down on the subject. He didn't want to talk about it until we came with the understanding that we have today, that we don't use the terms Lemuria or Atlantis. We say that over 12,000 years ago, there was what we call a global maritime culture, that there were advanced cultures all around this planet. We can show a line. If you go around the 30th parallel, if people want to go on a map and look where the Great Pyramid is, you take it around the planet, you will find pyramids around that whole band of the planet that are ancient civilizations that we're finding out all around the planet. And we've been to other countries. We've done things in Peru, in Bolivia, as well as in Lebanon, to Baalbek, to show that there was highly advanced civilizations all around the planet over 12,000 years ago who shared this information. And pyramids were machines producing free energy. They were never tombs for anyone.
Wow. Well, the Sphinx has always fascinated me. What exactly
me too.
is it? And who built it, and why did they build it, and actually, how old is it?
Okay, that's great. It returns us back to the beginning, because that is the beginning for me. As I said, when I was about 8 years old, to my mother's blessed memory, she always kept around our house, and I'm dating myself. I grew up in the early 50s. Life magazine and National Geographic. So I've always been a National Geographic fan, because I started to read it at a young age, and it fascinated me about ancient cultures, about other things that made me want to travel around the world. But again, it was stopping on a picture of the Sphinx at 8 years old. Now, I could not articulate what was happening, but now I know, and this is why I'm going to give you probably the most detailed answer to your question that you've ever heard, because the Sphinx and I have a very deep connection, very unconscious connection. She made to me, and she is the operative answer. But it wasn't, as I'm saying, I didn't just wake up 8 years old the next day and say, wow, I'm going to become an archaeologist, Egyptologist. No. But it made me want to question and ask. And so, being that I was born in the religion of Judaism, the only information I was given about the ancient Egyptians and the Sphinx is that it was a symbol of terror. It was a symbol of oppression, that the Hebrews were slaves and had to build the pyramids. And that story I rejected very early in my young. It just didn't make sense to me, and so I rejected the Judaism explanation of Egypt. Then I saw the Ten Commandments when Cecil B. DeMille put it out, and that didn't seem right either. So, I make a long story short, the Sphinx has guided my whole life, guided me on this path, guided me to Hakim. So as I say to you, 25 years ago in November, the first day I am in Egypt with Nikki Scully and this group, there is Hakim standing in front of the Sphinx. And I look at him, and I look at her, and I used to say this when I would do a presentation with him with me, because I would make this joke, and he would laugh, because, I always have told people throughout my life, if you meet someone that you think, man, woman, child, doesn't make a difference who or what they are, and you think they're a great master and a great teacher, and they don't make you laugh, and they don't have a great sense of humor, they're not for real. If someone is always serious, always wants to be, and being hard and harsh, and there's no other side to it, they're not for real. And one thing Hakim had, as I share with him, is the greatest of sense of humor. So I would say that I'd be looking at the Sphinx, I'd look at her, I'd look at him, and I couldn't tell who was older, because at this time he had this face, and I have pictures on, people can go to my Facebook page, and we'll be seeing pictures of him when I do this documentary. He had this great face when he was old. It looked like it was a timeless face. So he would laugh when I would make that joke. But the truth of the matter is, the Sphinx said to me then, this is the man you've been looking for all your life. This is your teacher. This is your master. He is my son. And that was it. From then on, I stayed with him. I listened to every word he said. I followed him very closely. He intimated things that corroborated what I'd already done, not to backtrack for people. I have 2 master's degrees. My second master's degree was in social sciences from the Women's Studies Department of San Jose State University in the late 70s. I was a feminist in the late 70s, had done work. A lot of my early work in prehistory was discovering that there had been ancient matriarchies, long before there were so-called patriarchal civilizations, there were matriarchal civilizations. And so I was set up for it. So I had already done a master's project on the role and position of women in ancient Egypt, saying that ancient Egypt was a matriarchy. And here was Hakim corroborating that. Oh, we're going around talking about the primacy of the woman, primacy of females. And so I pulled him aside after the first couple of days, and I asked him if he was part of this oral indigenous tradition I was searching for, and he said he was. And he told me to come back to Egypt and study with him, and that began the work. It wasn't until 5 years later. It'll be 20-year anniversary in September when I come back that I came, spent a couple of weeks with him, and we did the research, which became my first book, The Land of Osiris, which was an introduction to chematology, what he was teaching. I just put the label on it. I put the label chematology on what he was teaching. And what he was teaching, of course, was a highly advanced civilization, both spiritually and materially, who, as we show the material evidence, worked with the hardest stones we know on this planet. In fact, we've gotten so technical now working with geologists that one would have to have a very strong geology background to be able to stick with us now, because we're talking about igneous rocks, which include volcanic and plutonic stone. They're talking geology talk now, but we're talking about stones like granite, of course, diorite, basalt, and even harder stones than that. We see evidence of diamond tools, diamond tool work, and more than that, what Hakim wanted me to concentrate on, because he already knew my background as an archaeologist. I've been a field archaeologist for over 40 years now and studying prehistory for over almost 50 years. Because of my background, he wanted me to concentrate on two things: water and sound. The knowledge that the ancients had of both and the interplay of both. And sure enough, we tell you, I stand here right here and say that was what created the civilization. They used sound to create anti-gravity fields. That's the only way they could work with the weight that we're talking about. Hakim would always say to us, to deal with that weight, you must deal with the gravity. It's the only answer. Every other explanation does not fit. We have many, many other explanations. It just doesn't work as using anti-gravity. And sound, we know scientifically, has been proven in the laboratory, can create anti-gravity. And water. Water was the source of the energy for the pyramids. Now, I backtrack now. I say that when we were working together in the 90s, Hakim would say to me that there were two people that needed to enter the field to complete the work that we were doing. That one would be a geologist and one would be an engineer. Unbeknownst to us, the two people had already come into the field. Christopher Dunn, whose books and work I highly recommend to everyone, master engineer and machinist, went to Egypt in 1985, went inside the Great Pyramid, looked around and said, this is not a tomb, this is a machine. And then he went on to back engineer the Great Pyramid, did some land-breaking work in the 90s, and came out with a book I highly recommend in 1998 called The Giza Power Plant, where he basically said the Great Pyramid was a machine. And he also postulated that it produced hydrogen gas. Well, Hakim tells us that was what was happened. They used sound to actually break the bond of H2O into hydrogen and oxygen and created hydrogen gas. But the fact of the matter is, Rodney, we could spend the rest of the night just talking about the Great Pyramid and all the different types of energy it produced, because I mean, we could start out saying electricity, electromagnetism, magnetism. We could say radio waves. We could say sound waves, sonic waves. We could say hydrogen gas. And we could also say, because we have a quantum physicist on board with us, that it produced quantum waves. So the Great Pyramid, as a acoustic sonic machine, produced so many different types of energy, we can't even categorize them. But what Chris Dunn said it actually was is the Great Pyramid operates as a coupled oscillator. What that means is it is a device that is vibrating at a harmonic frequency with an already vibrating source. Well, what is the already vibrating source that the Great Pyramid vibrates to? The Earth herself, the Schumann resonance. So the Great Pyramid is a harmonic of the Schumann resonance. And the Schumann resonance, if folks have been listening and been keeping up with this stuff like I have for the last 30 years, the Schumann resonance is now going berserk. It is now going way higher than it has ever been recorded. Our Earth is definitely going to a shift. Not only the climate change, which Hakim predicted, but the magnetic pole shift, all of that. A lot of things are shifting now. It's all been predicted. It's part of what the Mayan prophecy was. It's part of what the Commission prophecy was. It's not the end. It is the end of a cycle, an age, but there's another cycle around the corner. One of the greatest foundation teachings that we have in chematology is not linear evolution, not going from the primitive to the complex, that everything moves in cycles. So we've gone through cycles all the time. So there is, in this teaching, there is no big bang, there is no beginning, there is no end, just cycles. But we're definitely shifting now into a lot of cycles coalescing now, as has been predicted, again, by indigenous people all over the planet. And I guess that was a lot to say in one piece there.
No, that's all right. Oh, man, fascinating. And I agree with you, too.
Well, you said about the Sphinx. Well, let me finish the Sphinx because I didn't answer your question. The Sphinx had told me that it is. So according to Hakim, according to the indigenous tradition, now again, this was a civilization that was matriarchal, not patriarchal. So exactly we do the opposite of what is done in Egyptology. Egyptology looks at kings and their sons. It looks at kings lists. We don't even look at that at all because the word pharaoh isn't even correctly translated. We've all, including myself, used the word wrong. It comes from the ancient term per-ah, which meant the high house. It was the woman's house. So descent went, even in the dynastic times that Egyptology thinks is what is Egypt, descent always went from mother to daughter. So there never was any male pharaohs. Period. End of discussion. Never was any male pharaohs. We could even argue whether they were kings or not until towards the end of the civilization. But it was the male head of the family who's the one who's portrayed in the statues, who's the one who's shown on the walls. They were flattering the male head of the family. But the civilization was a matriarchy. So their creation myth from the very beginning states that what was created, what was uncreated, they gave the title Nut, N-U-T. It's usually shown as the body of a woman, of course, a female, across the sky with the stars all in her body. She controlled all that is created, all that is uncreated. Now, the story is, when Nut wanted to manifest in physical form, she spit. Where she spit is the Sphinx today. The term is called Tefnut. Now, Tefnut, Egyptology, people can be Googling it right away and looking up what Egyptology says. It means the goddess of moisture, the goddess of humidity, but it means spit. It actually means the spit of. Now, why that? Hakim would say, well, when we, and I'll use the scientific term, when we expectorate, it's always never the same. There's no mass, there's no volume in our saliva when we let it go. So that they're saying that you cannot define the Great Mother because that's who Nut was, the Great Mother. But if you want to define her, we'll give her a title, Tefnut, and there she is in physical form. Hakim would tell the story, according to the indigenous tradition, that she is 54,000 years old. He would say that over 56,000 years ago. Now, I can go into great detail about the Sphinx and where the Sphinx Hollow is because I've done that with people, because all that was, as we know today, of the ground level of the plateau would just be what is the head of the Sphinx today. It would have been a limestone outcropping because it's natural limestone that formed under the ocean over 70 million years ago. That is what is the Giza Plateau and what it is based on. And so she would have been just what is called a yardang. That is just a limestone outcropping, before they even carved the statue. But he would say this carving was around 54,000 years ago, which makes her, according to us, the oldest statue that yet known extant on the planet. Nothing else that has been carved above the surface that anybody else can talk about is older than that can be proven. Now, how do we prove the age of the Sphinx? Well, again, we said that the two people who would come into the field had already come in. And this is to the benefit of the great independent researcher, independent Egyptologist, who actually was a great influence on me. And I've known John Anthony West, who is quite ill right now, so we wish him all the best and send him light healing energy. He was the one who had read in a book by the great Alsatian philosopher, people wanting to know what books to read. I recommend the works of R.A. Schwaller de Lubitsch. Very hard to understand, though. But he had written in the 50s that you look at the body of the Sphinx and the erosion is caused by water, not by wind and sand, which means the Sphinx must be older than the 4,500 years that they say she is and cannot be dynastic. So, Jonathan West said the idea then to get a geologist into the field who would do that, and he did. He got Dr. Robert Schoch from Boston University to come to Egypt with him in the early 90s, look at the Sphinx, and immediately Schoch recognized that the erosion in the body of the Sphinx and the hollow of the Sphinx is caused by water, not by wind and sand. So then he painstakingly mapped all. Now, limestone is a sedimentary rock. It forms under the ocean in layers. These layers are not uniform. They don't form all the same. They're different. One could be soft, one could be hard, soft or harder. He painstakingly mapped the whole, every structure, every sedimentary layer of the Sphinx Hollow and said some of the hardest layers are the most eroded. So he concluded it's not by a flash rainfall, not by a flash flood. It would take water beating down at an angle for hundreds, if not thousands of years to cause the erosion that we see on the body of the Sphinx. So then we go to the scientific field of paleoclimatology, ancient climatic patterns. And we know by the patterns there that it has not significantly rained in northern Africa to cause that type of erosion in over 30,000 years. So there was a marker, there's an event that occurred about approximately 30,000 years ago called the Mousterian subpluvial, where it rained very heavily in Africa. So, therefore, by conclusion, the Sphinx has to be older than 30,000 years to cause the type of erosion that is on the body of the Sphinx. And the head of the Sphinx has been recarved many times. It is not the original head. That also can be established. And so that's when Hakim comes in and he says, according to his tradition, she's 54,000 years old. Prove us wrong. And now you even get, you've gotten geologists that have come out now, just from a geological standpoint, that say the Sphinx could be 800,000 years old, which is absurd, because if it was that old, there'd be nothing left of her. But it's enough for us to say that she's over 12,000 years. I mean, that's where we're breaking ground in science, because it is accepted. Everybody accepts this date, that the Sphinx is 4,500 years old. It has the face of a male king, which is nonsense. The face of the Sphinx as she is today is that of a black African woman, and that can be easily established. And so this face of the Sphinx today is not even a man's face. We believe it was recarved in the so-called early dynastic times by a man to honor his mother, who was a black African woman and was the leader of the North at the time. And we could actually put a label on it, but it's only around, that face is only around 5,000 years old. So it's not the original face. The head is totally out of proportion with the body. And these people were masters of harmony and proportion. So we got the geologist and we got the engineer. And that's really opened up the field. And so when I do tours now, we always get tons of geologists and chemists and engineers of all types who come with us and just revel at this, information. Do you see, precision in granite that can approach 2/10,000ths of an inch, flat mirror-like surfaces, polished like glass. And they're telling us that this was done with copper tools or bronze tools, which can't even dent granite. And you get 100-ton boxes of granite with perfect right angles, cut like today. We couldn't hardly do it. We could accomplish it, but as Chris Dunn has written in his books and as researched, it wouldn't be feasible. People say, could we build the Great Pyramid today? Yes, we could. We have enough money in the world, we could. But it would cost so much and take so long that the project would be abandoned before it could be done. Yet, I believe the Great Pyramid could have been built in less than 10 years.
Wow. so how would that be possible to build a Great Pyramid?
You have to create anti-gravity fields to be able to lift the type of stones we're talking about. Now, you're talking about, if we want to deal with facts, the Great Pyramid today, as it is today, whether it was capped or not capped, the geometry still works. But it is flat surface. It is the only one that does not seem to have a capstone. So it's about 450 feet high, we'll say, on an average. We said it has an average side of 755 feet. It sits on 13 acres. By computer estimation, it is estimated to be anywhere between 2.3 and 3.9 million blocks of stone. It is estimated to weigh 6 to 7 million tons. So you've got stone in there, mostly limestone, two different types of limestone. There is the interior core limestone, which is quarried right from the plateau itself. We have tested it. It is not a synthetic. For those people before they're about to make their phone calls in to say, oh, I heard that the Great Pyramid is concrete and it was poured. We have tested the stone for over 10 years. That theory is utter nonsense. It is naturally quarried stone. And the casing stones were a different type of limestone, a pure white calcite limestone, which is quarried 8 miles away from the Giza Plateau. And that was the casing stones. But inside is granite. It is the cyanide granite, which comes from Aswan, 600 miles away. And the granite is, like the King's Chamber, is totally granite. And there are granite pillars in there. There's granite in different places. Now, some of these granite blocks are 9 feet long, estimated to weigh 70 to 100 tons. So they would have to be carried up a perpendicular plane, 250 feet, and placed with space-age precision to create a room of granite where you cannot even see the seams, the mortar, between the stones. In fact, it is said you could put a human hair in between them. It is so finely, precisely made. And so how was that done with primitive tools? Obviously not. We're looking at the theory is now, and we have a box that is what we call one. We feature when we take people to Egypt what we call many smoking guns. That type of idea that came out when the smoke actually came out during the Kennedy assassination. The idea that you have something that cannot be denied. It's absolute proof. We have many of them. One of them is in the Cairo Museum. As soon as you go in and take a left, but it is stashed over in the corner where most people never see it. It is a box. Now, it's a box that Egyptologists call a sarcophagus, which means that it was made to house a coffin, to house a body. We say no. The ones that we point out, which have no inscriptions on it, no hieroglyphs whatsoever, were resonance boxes for sound. But they were made out of the hardest materials, like diorite, like granodiorite, and granite. Now, we have one in cyanide granite right here. We look at it from the front. It's hollowed out. It's made squared out. Looks like it's being made as to be a so-called sarcophagus, a box. But you go around the back, and you look, and the lid is still attached. They originally were cutting the lid out of the same mother piece, of course, to keep the resonance, to keep the same vibrational quality. But whoever was using the tool had lost control, and it went off into the piece, and they stopped the work. Now, instead of modern civilizations like the Romans, who went into Egypt and did a lot of this, they would cut into pieces and use it for something else. No, they left it there. So they left their mistakes. This, again, is one of the reasons we say no aliens. Aliens would not have left their mistakes. So they left their mistakes and they went on and did it again. But it proves the theory that we are proposing, and it's called ultrasonic impact machining. It means that a tool where your head is vibrating at thousands of RPMs, and it produces a sonic wave in front of it, a sound wave. That sound wave actually alters the physics of the stone, making it easy to cut, and it presents a cutting path, which we demonstrate on this box. Actually makes an outline in the stone for the tool to follow. It's obviously that was happening, and the person lost control of the tool, and it went off into the tool, and they stopped. And we also believed it had to have a diamond edge, had to have either diamond encrusted blade or diamond blade itself to be able to cut through these materials like it did. So that throws out the whole idea, again, this idea of linear evolution. We've gone from the primitive to the complex, so that we today are the sum total of all human evolution where the highest state's ever been. Well, we are the sum state, yes, some state, yes, but we're not the highest state. Actually, again, in this idea of cycles, we talk about 5 cycles of the sun. It represents how the sun moves daily across the sky. It represents stages in our consciousness development and stages in prehistory. So of those 5 cycles, we have been for the last 5,000 years, and this is firmly elucidated in my second book, From Light into Darkness, we've been in the darkest stage, the stage of night, of the stage of polarity, duality. So we're not in the highest state of consciousness at all. We were when we built the pyramids over 12,000 years ago.
Wow. So I've read that the number 42 is really important to the ancient Egyptians. Why?
Yeah, there's certain numbers that come. 5 is one, of course, like 5 stages of the sun, 5 purs. 42 seems to be related to the fact that what originally made up this civilization was 42 tribes, 42 main tribes. They then broke up into many, many sub-tribes, which is why Africa has so many sub-tribes today. But Hakim was always adamant that Kemet, what we call Kemet, was not just Africa, also was Asia and Europa, he would say, Southern Europe. So what was this great advanced civilization was all of what would be the Middle East today, and through Afghanistan, through Turkey, through almost to Asia. And it would have been Southern Europe, was why now discovering many, many ancient artifacts in Southern Europe, which may go way back. So 42 tribes, appears over and over again. 42 judges of Osiris. There were 42 what we call the negative confession. There were 40, and in the great myth of Osiris and his brother, jealous brother Set, and Horus and Isis. Set originally has his brother murdered, and his body cut into 42 pieces. So the whole idea is the tribes were scattered. The 42 tribes either have a piece of Osiris supposed to come back at a time, and that time is now, to become whole again. So this is why we have had the whole movement that we have, again, so-called New Age, all of this stuff happening the last 30, 40, 50 years is the time now. It's also, why we had December 21st, 2012 on the Mayan calendar and all that. Is all times now, cycles, many different cycles. We're coming to the end of a 26,000-year cycle, a 13,000-year cycle, a 65,000-year cycle according to the Commission indigenous tradition. So many, many different cycles are coalescing now, coming to a point. And so this idea of the 42 tribes are supposed to come back together now. And it was all races of people. This is another radical teaching that we present, is that all races evolved in what we could call Africa, but it was Kemet. And even the so-called Caucasian white race. So we all came from the same place. We all came from the same mother.
Yeah. Did the biblical plagues of Egypt really happen, and as it is written in the Bible? And is there any evidence that proves or disproves any of the plagues that supposedly or did happen?
Yes, and there's a whole field of biblical archaeology. Now, some of it is very extreme fundamentalists, of course, who want to use archaeology to prove the Bible instead of the other way around, instead of just let archaeology determine what the Bible was talking about. So it's obvious that there is history in the Bible and there is literature in the Bible. So there is embellishment for certain reasons. But as I say, the major event that I concentrated on, which of course is in my second book, is the Exodus, which many, many people, so-called scholars today, Egyptologists, archaeologists, whatever, prehistorians, dismiss as a purely mythological event, that it never really happened. It was just made up by the later Hebrew scribes to present an identity for these people. Well, I disagree with that, of course, totally. My research says there was an event. In fact, my research over 50 years, as I've said, has indicated that for every myth, there was an actual event in time and space. So there were events that were incorporated into the 10 plagues. There is an algae that turns the Nile red. That's the blood of the Nile. There was definitely frogs and boils and locusts that has happened. That is actually recorded in papyrus of the time period where the Exodus supposedly took place, which is called the New Kingdom period of dynastic Egypt, according to their chronology. So there were events that have been recorded on papyruses, historical events that there were these events, but they were all incorporated into this one time period to make it seem that these were God's punishments. But there actually is a scene on a wall in a temple in the south of Egypt. The temple is known as the Ramesseum. That's not what the ancient name of the temple was. It was later taken over in the 19th dynasty by the followers of Ramses II. But there's an event that's shown on the walls there of a sea battle. And interestingly enough, it shows people in chariots being drowned at sea, and it looks very much like the scene in the Exodus. But lo and behold, the story is reversed. it shows then the enemies of the Egyptians are the ones who drown in the sea, and the Egyptians at that time period are victorious. Hakim would always present this scene as the Exodus from the Egypt side, but it later turns out, and again this is detailed in my second book, proves that there was a historical event. What we say is the Exodus was the followers of this particular king named Akhenaten, and if you want me to start talking about him, it'll take up the rest of the show by itself. It could be a whole show in itself, my second book. But basically, there was a historical event where this king had proposed a series of returning to the age before, the age of Aten, the age of the four we're in now, which is the age of Amen. I wanted to return to, he did not invent monotheism, he did not invent a lot of things which people created to him, but basically what the Exodus was the priests of Amen who had been deposed by this king coming back to power and chasing his followers out of Egypt, and his followers later became the Israelites, later became the Hebrews of Judah and Israel, and became the ones who brought Mosaic Judaism. So what my second book is actually saying is what we call Mosaic Judaism was directly the teachings of this particular king, Akhenaten. So yes, the plagues did happen. They did not happen necessarily in the order that it was said, but there definitely has been many times in history. Now we could go back to even the time of Jesus when Herod was told that there was a prophecy that someone was going to be born and would wipe him out, and so then they sent out the Romans to kill all the firstborn. So that story has come down many different times. There actually is a story of an Akkadian king, Akkad, which is Akkad. If people want to research it, it's a civilization that was around where Iraq, where Babylon later became, named Sargon, Sargon. People can Google him too, where he had the same little story that appeared for Moses in the Exodus, that when he was born, the king at the time was given a prophecy that great king has been born and is going to take your place, and he sent out his officers to kill all the newborn males, and his mother hid him in bulrushes, sent him down the Tigris Euphrates. Doesn't the story sound familiar? And he was rescued and later on became the king. Well, that's the same story of Moses in the bulrushes, same story. Well, there's nothing original in the Bible. And that's one of the things where, again, I've gotten a lot of fundamentalists who want to, of course, put me up at the stake and do away with me and burn my books and whatever. But there's nothing original in the Bible. There's nothing original in the Torah, the Old Testament. There's nothing original in the New Testament, and there's nothing original in the Quran. They were all old stories compiled together, put together for a specific agenda.
Yeah, I kind of noticed that when I was growing up and going to church and stuff, and then as I kept getting older, I kept questioning it. And being in the Appalachian Mountains, oh boy, did I catch hell!
Of course, I had people write to me after my book out and saying, "Why am I bashing Christians and why am I bashing?" And I never say a negative word about Jesus in my life, but why am I bashing Christians and Christianity? No. One thing people have to learn who still want to remain religious is to be able to separate the teachings of the individual, in these cases Moses, Abraham, Jesus, and Muhammad, to separate the teachings that they were trying to promote from what the religion has become today.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And that's true around the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, getting off the Bible now. I'll have everybody driving by my house and throwing shit at me.
No, we don't want that. We don't need that. It's interesting to know that that really is what was the basis of my second book, to differentiate the terms spirituality and religion, because it is taught in academia that they're the same thing, and they're not. Religion is something that's been created. I actually say it's the business based around spirituality. We've always been a spiritual creature, and we've always had spiritual understandings. But as I say, this time when we talk about ancient Kemet, over 12,000 years ago, there was no religion. There was no concept of God. There was no concept of soul or death. And that's hard for people to understand. But they were highly spiritual people. Very, very spiritual people. As I say, everything they did they considered spiritual. There was no separation between the spiritual and the material.
Well, in your opinion, what happened to Nefertiti and her disappearance from the history of Egypt?
I think it's a good question. There actually was a great controversy just recently by a British Egyptologist who was claiming that there's another secret room in Tut's tomb, and Nefertiti is buried there. So he got the Egyptian government to get all excited about that, and they went and did scans. And sure enough, they said, "Oh yeah, there's extra rooms," which of course we already knew, but there's nothing that we can see inside them. So, but the mystery is what happened not only to Nefertiti but to her 6 daughters and to Akhenaten, her consort. We won't say husband because they had no such words as husband or wife. She was the Per'ah. Probably murdered and probably body destroyed. So there was no mummification. There's no body to be found of either one of them. Now, some people, of course, who go into different realms of it, say that Akhenaten ascended, just like Jesus, so that there'll never be a body found. But there's no doubt in my mind there were tombs cut for them in the city that they created, which is today called Tel El Amarna, and we take groups there. It was called Achet Aten to him, but none of those tombs were ever occupied. So that led us to believe that his followers left Egypt and became the Israelites. That became the Jews, became the Hebrews. But what happened to Nefertiti? Again, there are many, many different books written on the subject. Some say she left Egypt, she went to England, she fostered a whole group of people there, or she lived in Africa, or she was here, she was there, she was everywhere. But there's no real evidence. What the evidence is that she's there for a certain number of years. We can see where her palace was, we can see where she lived, but then there's no evidence. Or him.
Well, what has been the strangest and weirdest evidence that you've found within your research of Egypt?
Well, it's just, his ability to work with these incredible weights. We show, again, one of these smoking guns we show is what we call an unfinished obelisk, which is about 110 feet long, weighs estimated 1,200 tons, and it was one single piece of cyanide granite. And they had every intention of cutting this piece, lifting this piece, and putting it into position. But when they were cutting it, undercutting it to get it ready to be lifted, they found a natural crack in the stone, and they left it. Again, they left their mistakes for us to find. So I'm constantly amazed at the knowledge that we once had. And how we explain that is that Hakim taught, again according to the tradition, we're born innately with 360 senses. 180 we label feminine, 180 we label masculine. Now we think we only have 5. So that's why he would say we're crippled today. So we had all of this other abilities to do these amazing things. And so I'm constantly amazed, and it never gets old to me. As I said, I first went 25 years ago. I just came back in March. That was my 21st trip in these going on 25 years. It never gets old. That's always exciting. I always enjoy seeing people that I bring for the first time have these what we call life-changing experiences. Again, spiritual as well as the material, the scientists, the academics who want to come. They can see it for themselves and judge it for themselves according to their own backgrounds. But the people who want to have a spiritual experience, it's uplifting, tremendous experience. And it never gets old. And we always discover something new. So it's always more. Just in the last couple of years, we've been able to determine that we worked on harder than granite. There is a bowl. I actually should have sent you a picture that you could have put up on the website. I could still send it to you. A bowl that, because we now can take photographs in the Cairo Museum again. I took photographs in there in 1997, which became in my book, and then they outlawed no flash, no pictures, no cameras, no video, nothing. People would sneak cell phones in there, and sometimes we'd cop a picture, but no. And all of a sudden in 2015, they changed the policy. Yes, you can get a ticket again for a camera and bring cameras. And so we've taken thousands, literally tens of thousands of pictures in the Cairo Museum in just the last 3 years. And so one of these pictures we have is of a bowl This particular bowl, very interesting, finely machined, highly carved with a lip and a lid around it. Beautiful bowl. Well, our geologists, we had a look at it, and we thought, is it possibility that this bowl contains corundum? She looked at it and said it's highly possible because corundum forms in deposits of granite. We thought the bowl was like a diorite, porphyritic diorite. No, it's a granitic bowl, but it may have corundum in it. Now, what is corundum? Well, corundum, people know, we're looking in geology now, we're talking about the Mohs scale, MOHS, how they determine the hardness of stone. You go from like soft stone, like limestone being 3, sandstone being 3, calcite being around that time, to all the way up to granite is 7 because of quartz. The quality of quartz is what gives the hardness of granite. How much quartz in the stone, it determines the hardness of granite. But corundum, pure corundum, is ruby. Diamond, of course, is 10. Well, ruby is 9. Topaz, gemstones, 9. Well, the bowl is not pure corundum, but if it contains corundum, this bowl is 8.5 on the scale, harder than granite. How did they do it? That's still a mystery. I mean, we can say ultrasonic impact machining, but exactly how it was done is still the mystery we have out there, and that's why we present it for so many people, and everybody wants to speculate and come up with their pet theories, and that's fine. But within the people who've worked with stone, people who've actually done machining, they can't come up with the idea. I mean, how do you carve a bowl that's 8.5 without has to have diamond tools to cut it? And even then, it's going to be an adventure.
Yeah. No kidding.
So, every year we find something new. We're always amazed at what we say, the knowledge that we once had, what it means to operate with 360 senses. I mean, some of the things I could just talk about. It means thinking in 3D, thinking not only in plane geometry, which we normally do, two-dimension, we can sometimes think in 3D, but think in 4 dimensions, thinking in cubes, thinking in actually what the Great Pyramid is a star tetrahedron. We normally say it's a triangle imposed upon a square, but that's plane geometry. It is actually a cube. It is actually the cone on a cube. It is a star tetrahedron. So people could, and it's actually 8-sided, not 4-sided. Each side is bisected, so that this would, again, where did geometry come from? It supposedly came from the Greeks. No. The Greeks learned all of this from the Cometians, from Egypt. Pythagoras himself was initiated in Egypt. That's how he came up with the whole idea of solid or sacred geometry, and the Pythagoreans and the Platonic spheres. All of that stuff was once known. And again, there will never be any blueprints found to the Great Pyramid. All of this was before there was writing. It was all done in the mind.
Wow. Well, that kind of where you're talking about stones and gems. What do you know about the yellow-green gem on the necklace of the pharaoh Tutankhamun that was made from the Great Sea glass?
Some of it is volcanic glass. Some of what you're talking about is citrine. They actually use citrine, which is a yellowish quartz. Basically, and also it's coming to me. It starts with a C. Carnelian. Carnelian was a gemstone that they loved. It appears in red and yellow and green. So some of that is some of it that they've called volcanic glass that they think was, again, extraterrestrial is not necessarily so. It is a gemstone. And again, they loved lapis for blue. They loved malachite for green. They did amazing things with it. I've seen things even more spectacular than Tut. Tut's stuff is so amazing because it was virtually an intact tomb, not totally intact. We know now it was robbed 3 weeks after he was buried. And again, this is how bad their system was that they tried to sell to the people. Here's what the religion was in those days. We're going to take care of your body for you. You have to make sure you pay us and keep up the upkeep. So that, just like today, if people listening to me about funerary expenses today and about what it means to take care of a loved one, well, this all goes back 5,000 years in Egypt. They would say, we'll take care of your body. We'll preserve it. We'll perfect it. We'll make it so you can come back to it. And all you have to do, we'll do these prayers. We'll do this magic. We'll do all these things, and we'll take care of it after you're gone. And we'll perpetuate, blah, 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 blah. Well, we know from all the mummies we found, nobody ever came back. So it was a good story. And we also know the fact that most of these tombs were robbed very soon after people were buried, particularly in one area. Like there's the oldest area is known as the Old Kingdom, which is around 5,000 years ago to around 4,000 years ago. And then we know that the period that came after, the so-called Middle Kingdom, well, they just went and robbed all the Old Kingdom tombs and you reused all the material for the New Kingdom. So these things, it was always robbed. And this is the excuse they give why, of course, there's nothing ever found in the pyramids because they were robbed. Well, nothing's ever been found that relates to it. But we know the tombs themselves were always robbed, and so that these things were always reused. So, I mean, we have seen things that are even much more amazing than Tut's. So Tut's tomb was robbed 3 weeks after, and it actually was robbed by Carter and Carnarvon, who found the tomb in 1922. They stole some things out of there 3 weeks before the tomb was officially opened. I mean, this is, unfortunately, archaeology has often been called glorified grave robbing, and in fact, that's how archaeology really began, going back to the Greeks, who were the first ones who came into Egypt and stole things out of Egypt, then the Romans, and then every other civilization that's ever gone into Egypt has stolen things from Egypt, including the American, including the French, including the German, including the Italian, and everywhere in English, everywhere around the world are Egyptian artifacts that have been stolen from Egypt. So tomb robbing was what archaeology eventually became. And for now, it's supposed to be a science, and things are supposed to be reported and not stolen. But we could go on and on about the modern tomb robbers that have raided Egypt in just in the last 20 years, and in some of them who were in charge of archaeology in Egypt. So, and I know it for a fact. So I'm not just speaking in telling rumors or tall tales. I know for a fact what's been going on in archaeology in Egypt for the last 40, 50 years, and actually more than that. And it's always been a matter of finding things and stealing things and then reporting certain things. So to make my point, I've seen jewelry that is unbelievable what they could do, that actually makes Tut stuff look modern and mundane. I mean, you can find beads made out of gold or gems with a hole drilled in it so small. How could they possibly have had a drill bit that tiny to make these earrings? We can see miniatures of the so-called netters, the gods and goddesses, which are called netters, that are so small, maybe less than an eighth, 16th of an inch, that with perfect detail in carving out of the hardest materials. How did they possibly do that? So again, Rodney, we've answered a lot of things in the last 40, 50 years, but the questions we have just increase. And that only comes, as has been predicted to us, and again, we have prophecy involved in these teachings. Hakim called the time that we're in now the awakening, when people would finally wake up. And sometimes that seems the hardest thing to believe these days, as it seems like there's so much darkness around the planet. And if we talk about the modern politics and things, we could get caught up in that. But it is an awakening. It is a time when, as we say, all the prophecies of all the indigenous people are coming to a point when we're supposed to start to wake up now and gain our senses back and realize. And so more and more we'll get back to the point where we're going to understand more and more what we once knew. Like we say, someone like physicist Andrei Pucharik said, virtually invented the 20th century. We would not have anything today that we have if it wasn't for Nikola Tesla. Alternating current, ignition coils, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. More and more. He has more patents in his name in the U.S. than in every other person combined. Over 600 patents in Tesla's name. Actually, more than that. More than that. Thousands of patents. And so, but he actually, all he did was rediscover what was once known. The pyramids were free energy devices. We once had free energy that ran our civilizations around the planet. And it is going to come back to us, so we will know. But yeah, to think about, sure, we could take you into, there's a whole room for Tut stuff. You can see the gold mask, you can see the gold. When Tut's tomb was found in 1922, and then they estimated the total amount of gold that was in the tomb, it totally changed the world market in gold. And for a brief period, Egypt was one of the wealthiest nations on the planet with just the gold found in that one tomb.
Wow,
Yep.
that's amazing. Well,
Yep.
we talked about you talked about a little bit about the pyramids, but what about I've read about a lost pyramid that was made of black stone that was described by the explorer Frederick Norton. Do you know
Wow.
anything about that?
I just, I've just recently become across that myself. I had heard his name. He was a French traveler in the 1700s, but I'd never read anything in detail about it until just recently, where it was exposed to me too. Now, interestingly enough, Hakim said that there were originally 9 large pyramids on the full Giza plateau, what would be called, which is much larger than what people think it is. It goes way out into the desert. So there are 9 pyramids there now, but 3 large and 6 small, the satellite pyramids around them. No, he was saying that there were originally 9 large, full-size pyramids. So he told me once where there would be found the 4th pyramid, but it would be all quarried. There would be hardly anything left of it, or all destroyed. For years, I kept that information. Finally, in 2012, I went and investigated with his son, and we found what we think is the evidence of it. So then this Norden stuff was revealed to me. Now, Black Pyramid, I have difficulty with because he's saying black granite. Now, again, since we've had geologists come into the field, and we're working with a top-notch geologist named Susan Moore, who's a part of our school. We call it the Kemet School. She has been working as a consultant geologist in Canada for the Canadian oil and gas industry for over 40 years. She's a superb geologist and has taught us much about stone. So there is no such thing as black granite. What would be the dark-colored stone would be diorite or granodiorite or porphyritic diorite or basalt. Now, basalt, no, would not be basalt. We have never seen a diorite pyramid yet. So there's never been. All the pyramids are either limestone or granite. Or with calcite, with what we call travertine in them, but no diorite. So the whole idea of being a black pyramid turns me off to begin with, but it sounds like Norden, in his description, is describing it firsthand. So that's the confusing part. But where he puts it on his map is not where we found, where Hakim indicated where we think the 4th pyramid was. So there have been rumors and stories. Other people have talked about other pyramids and made drawings of them. But again, black pyramid really is something that bothers me because there is no black granite, and some of it, like the 3rd pyramid at Giza, does have granite covering at the bottom, but it is a cyanite rose granite.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
I don't think Norden is correct, but it is interesting. No Egyptologist has ever discussed his find.
Wow. That is interesting.
So no one else has ever taken it interesting. How did you get this information? Was this just recently sent to you, or is this something you knew for some time?
That is something I was looking up, and because when I do questions, especially about Egypt or the Great Pyramid or anybody I talk to, I try to do really in-depth investigation myself, and
well, it's interesting. It was just sent to me by one of the people who was just in Egypt with us, and had seen this reference and sent it to me and sent a quote from him. And it sounds like he's describing it firsthand, but I have real problems with where he's describing it. There's nothing there because we've investigated the area where he pinpoints it on his map. Nothing at all. I mean, and the fact that he said he saw it in the 1700s, it's virtually impossible for a pyramid to be totally quarried without anything around in 300 years. This pyramid that we're talking about, we think was part of the destruction of the cataclysm 12,000 years ago. So that's why there's very little remnants of it. But I find it hard to believe that a pyramid could be totally quarried without any trace of it in 300 years. I just have great difficulty with that because the Arabs were not that great. We think that they tore apart the pyramids, they built mosques in Cairo, but actually, basically, they gathered a lot of loose stone, a lot of loose limestone and granite that had already fallen off the pyramids from this great cataclysmic event. The Romans did it too. We see evidence of the Romans quarrying around the Giza Plateau, and so it would be very, very difficult to totally dismantle a pyramid. Very, very difficult.
Okay. Well, what are your thoughts on the dendrolite?
Dendrolites?
Am I saying that all right? Dendraa. Sorry.
Dendara?
Yeah, Dendara. Sorry.
Oh, you're talking about the so-called light bulbs. Right.
Yeah,
Oh, yes.
Remember, under Appalachia, we say things different.
Well, actually, your area of the world in Virginia is beautiful. I was once in Roanoke, and it's gorgeous there. I remember being on a horse farm in Roanoke.
Wow. Yep, I live probably about an hour and a half from Roanoke.
Yeah, it's beautiful country. And that was the original Americans came. So, but in Dendara, it's the temple of Hathor, which is a female, so-called, became later Venus and Aphrodite to the Romans and Greeks. And her temple has what are called crypts. They're things that you have to go down and crawl down into underneath the temple, where only certain, like the high priestesses, initiates would go, and where secret information was stored. Now, there's a lot of things down there, and a lot of people interpret it very differently. But Hakim took me to a certain series of glyphs there and said this was one of his interpretations. Now, there's a scene that shows what looks like a giant holding what surely looks like a light bulb, and it's attached, actually not wireless electricity, shows a wire being attached into some type of device, and there's a snake. That's the filament in there. Well, in ancient mythology, symbology, a snake has always represented electrical energy, kundalini energy, from the base of our spine in yoga. So, is it representing electricity? Well, some people interpret it's just symbolic, it's lotuses, but it sure looks like light bulb, what we call Crookes tubes. People can Google that. Crookes. Joseph, I forgot his first name. Thomas Crook, I think, was the man who invented the vacuum tube, which became the light bulb that Edison used to light. So we say they look like Crookes tubes. Well, on the other wall, you look around, and there it is again, but then there the beam of the snake is being deflected by a creature which we said looked like a baboon, but some people said no, looks reptilian. Whatever the creature is, holding up two knives and deflecting the beam of the so-called light bulb. Now, Hakim tells us what the texts say is issuing a warning that what's being depicted there is a knowledge of energy, can be abused. So we say that's one of the origins of the myth of Atlantis, because the idea of Atlantis had a technology that later became abused, and that's why it fell. Well, what it is basically saying, we think it's talking about the ancient Cometians, who had the ability to harness electricity, had the ability to harness great power and great knowledge, and again saying, in modern times, that could be abused. And that is the basis of the modern cycle we're in, which we call the Age of Amun, which is the age of polarity, duality, where there's us and them philosophy, where there's wars, systematic institutionalized warfare, patriarchal religions, etc. So there is a warning there. Now, this temple that we're in was reconstructed by the Ptolemaic Greeks around 300 BCE. But we know now that what the crypts are things that were assembled from other temples. Some are partially limestone, partially sandstone. Most of the Temple of Hathor is sandstone, which is what all the Greeks could work in at that time. They could not work in the hard granite stone that the ancient people worked in. So the warnings there are much, much more ancient. It's talking about ancient warnings, ancient stories, and also on the walls down there in the same area with these light bulbs are alchemical texts, which are magical formulas, whole different ideas, which again, this area was not open to everyone. What were the crypts would only be the highest of initiates, the highest priestesses would go down there to learn this information. It's only in modern times that we can go down there and see this, which was their secret information. And so there's many, many different meanings to the symbols and glyphs that are on the walls there. And they go on different levels of understanding. But it's basically showing alchemical texts, and this warning that there was a knowledge that could be once was used that could be abused. And it certainly not only has been the symbol for the fall of Atlantis, but it's a symbol of today. I mean, it's a symbol of the fall of what some people think humanity is in spiritually today, having great technological and power. We can destroy this earth many, many times over, but our spiritual development has not kept up.
with the technological development in these last couple hundred years in particular.
Wow.
So that's why Hakeem would say this is the point now. We're at the awakening. We're at the time now where I would once, to an audience of 400 people, where I was saying that according to this teaching, people are going to wake up in the middle of the night and know something that they did not know before. And I looked down there in the first, second, third row, there was a woman elbowing her friend saying, see, I told you. And like that was confirmation to what I was saying. And people are, I get that from people all the time, saying, sometimes they're having these incredible prophetic dreams now, and then the dreams come true. Some people are seeing a lot of events unfolding in their dreams. There's been a lot of so-called prophets in the last 20, 30 years. Many have been very wrong, but some have been very right. There were people who warned us about this environmental crisis over 50 years ago, but nobody was paying any attention. And now we better start paying attention.
I agree 100% on that. Well, I know Napoleon was in Egypt, and he actually was, went inside the Great Pyramid. And he was left alone, from what I understand and what I've read. And on his deathbed, he was asked about his experience in the Great Pyramid. And this is a quote he said, "No, what's the use? You never believe me." What do you think?
That's Napoleon. Is that who you're talking about?
Yes,
Napoleon. Okay, I'll tell you the rest of the story, because there is more to the story. That is true. Napoleon was a usurper. He was a dictator. He declared himself emperor of France, and he declared himself the head of the Masons and the Rosicrucians, which he didn't earn. But to his credit, when he did go to Egypt intended to conquer, he took with him what were called the savants in French, his scientists, the geologists, the chemists, the archaeologists, the scientists of his day. And they did an incredible job of wood carvings, wood block etchings of what they saw, many of which, published in 1799, are precious today because some of the things they recorded no longer exist. So, to his credit. But, yes, the story is Napoleon went to the king's chamber, told all his officers to wait outside. He was going to go in and be alone. Came out, ashen, white as a sheet, and would not, as he said, would not talk about the experience. And then went on the steps of the Great Pyramid and made this great speech where I almost know the French soldat, he would say, he would tell his soldiers, we're standing on thousands of years of history and blah, 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 and awesomeness and all that, because he had a profound experience. But on his deathbed, when he was exiled to the island of Elba, he told what he saw. What he had seen in the Great Pyramid was his Waterloo, was his downfall. This was 1798. He saw what was going to happen in 1815. Actually, it was around 1813, 1814. He died in 1815, I think. But he saw his Waterloo, and that's why he never talked about it. But many, many people, I can tell you, many people, just people I've brought in the last 10 years, have incredible experiences. What we do is we chant in the Great Pyramid because the pyramid gets turned on by sound, and people have these incredible. They lie down in the stone box. They can have out-of-body experiences. I myself once spent a half an hour in the King's Chamber by myself with the lights out, and that is the deepest out-of-body experience I've ever had in my life. Has been inside the Great Pyramid. I've had many. I've been on the spiritual path since the late 60s. Got involved with the Rosicrucian Order, which I talk about in the late 70s. Was on many different Eastern paths of meditation, yoga, and all this and all that until I met Hakeem and his teachings. So I followed many, many different paths. The most profound spiritual experiences I've ever had have been in the Great Pyramid or in the temples of Egypt. The most profound out-of-body experiences. And again, we can arrange to be in the King's Chamber where the lights get turned off and there's no sound. And you never can experience total sound when they turn off the fans, too, which sometimes they don't do. But once we get them to turn off the fans, you can never experience total blackness and total silence like you can inside these places. And, some people freak out, of course, if you're claustrophobic. But the majority of people I've brought have these life-altering experiences which they never forget.
Wow. I would love to go to Egypt. Oh, my God. That'd be something to mark off the bucket list.
I know. But the problem, like I tell people who tell me that year after year, it unfortunately doesn't get cheaper. Sometimes flights go down, and you can get a cheap flight, but the cost of going to the sites, the cost of the hotels, the cost of tours goes up every year. I mean, it's an illogical thing that they've done because tourism has died there. Just if we talk about some modern history, after 9/11, of course. I mean, tourism in Egypt peaked in the 90s and early 2000s. After 9/11, of course, Americans didn't come back as much as it used to be, but particularly since the January 25th revolution in Egypt of 2011 and then a follow-up revolution where they kicked out the Muslim Brotherhood in 2013 has, virtually devastated tourism in Egypt. So it's nothing like it once was. I mean, it used to be almost a $10 billion a year industry. It's not even close to that now. But unfortunately, the logic that they've done is they keep building new hotels, they keep raising the prices, so it gets more expensive for people to come when it should be cheaper. I mean, if you really want to bring people back, cut the prices, cut the cost, but we can't because fuel costs, jet plane fuel costs, hotels go up, boats go up, and the cost to go to the sites go up. The cost, we actually rent the Great Pyramid to do what we do for our groups. It's included in the cost of the tour, but it goes up every year, and sometimes it doubles. And so, we rent it for 2 hours for ourselves. Nobody else comes in, just our group. We can also rent the Hollow of the Sphinx, go right into the Sphinx so we can show the geology firsthand, look at it, observe it, see it for yourself. Again, that's an extra fee to do that, but we charge what's part of the cost, but the costs go up every year, so it's an unfortunate thing. I've had so many people say to me, well, I'm saving up. I'm going to do it next year. And I say, okay, but next year it's going to be more. And it's the truth. It's been the truth since 2012. It goes up every year. Sometimes these sites double. I mean, that's illogical if you want to increase tourism, but that's the way they do it. So they're making it only the more wealthy, the elite, the retired people are the ones who can come to Egypt, or the only young people that can afford to come are those who have a really good job and can get a good vacation. But more than ever, it's retired folks, or it's people from other countries where it's not as expensive to come. We just had a group of 20 people from 6 different countries, and it was an incredible group of people, incredible group of all ages, experienced travelers. But mostly now, it's older folks. More, people who are retired who can afford to come.
Well, see, I got out of a meeting before, before the show, and a small coal town that I've actually built for the past 6 years on doing haunted tours where I'm into the paranormal and stuff. And, and we've had like 189 people, which may not be a lot of people to some tourism sites, but for
that's
this
a lot of people to go to Egypt. Are you kidding? Like I said, we get 25 now. We had a group in 2013 that featured Chris Dunn with us where we had 42 people. That's one of the largest groups we've had in years. In 2004, I had a group of 65 people. Hakeem used to do tours with Barbara Hand Clow of 150 people. In 1992, when I went, there was a channeling conference that was after the tour that I did. I did 2 weeks on the tour and then another week on the channeling conference. There were 250 people at this conference. I mean, wow. But it's rare that a group like that comes to Egypt anymore. To show you an example, Rodney, at peak times, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, there were 440 boats that sailed the Nile as tourist boats. Today, there's less than 40.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. Well, see, that's what I was trying to tell them at the meeting, that, here they're wanting to raise the prices, and I don't want to raise the price because I want to keep it at the $5 a ticket and show people around and show them the town and show them what we've got also. And but it's turned into a money thing now. It's not about the town.
Well, it's hard to try to offer people the best price. We try to do that, but it's hard when the costs go up to you every year, and and everybody's got to try to make their little piece if they can. And so there's always a middleman. There's always somebody's got his hand out. In Egypt, the expression in Egypt is, You call it corruption. We call it the way of life. So everybody in Egypt's got their hand out. So there's always a bribe here and there. I mean, you can always go whenever I would say to Hakeem, "Oh, can we go to this place? Can we go to that place?" He would always say to me, "It all depends on who has the key." So you can always get to the, they'll tell you when you come to Egypt, used to always tell you in the guidebooks, this is forbidden, that's forbidden. Used to tell you it's forbidden to climb up the Great Pyramid. Well, it's forbidden in the daytime, but you could do it at night if you paid enough money. But now, because just a couple of years ago, a German kid, 18-year-old kid, climbed up the Great Pyramid in the daytime, took video, put it on Facebook, and now it's impossible for anybody else to be able to climb up the Great Pyramid. Because he got home. He got back home. He laughed about it and put it up on Facebook. But whoever was on guard duty that day is in jail. Whoever was the tour guide who he used, or tour company that he used to get to the site, is in jail. So now the cost is so much. It used to be, again, when I would take people in the 90s, it'd say, okay, we can get you to climb up the Great Pyramid. It's going to cost you some money, but you have to have a group. It has to be at midnight, and it would cost you about $60 American per person. Then it went up to $100. Then it went up to $200. Well, the last time it was offered to me for any person in my group to go up, it was $500 per person. And so I don't know what this kid paid to get up there. If he didn't pay, he got up there, he took the video, he put it on Facebook, and everybody else who was involved with that is in jail. It ruined it for anybody else. And to me, scientifically, archaeologically, chematologically, I've always wanted to get up to the top of the Great Pyramid because the Great Pyramid is the only one that's not capped. So some people said, oh, there was a capstone and they took it off. The Arabs did it in the Middle Ages. I don't think so. I don't think it was ever capped. And yet the geometry works. For all the mathematicians out there who play with the numbers, whether you use a capstone an extra 30 feet or not, all the geometry still works in the Great Pyramid. But I think it was specifically not capped. But I would have to get up to the top to prove it. But now it's virtually impossible.
Damn. Well,
so yeah, people can ruin it. I mean, we had just 2 years ago, a little 15-year-old Chinese kid decided to carve his name in a cartouche at the Temple of Abydos, which has some of the most pristine, beautiful carvings still in color that are 3,000 to 4,000 years old. And here this kid just went and scratched his name in there. And, of course, it was a big stink, and the Chinese government had to apologize. But, I mean, that's the type of thing that, we sometimes have to deal with if people don't understand what they're looking at and appreciate what they're seeing and have the advantage. But again, we tell people, for everyone who's listening, now is the time to go. Now, next year, this year, next year, because virtually some of the sites are empty. And we always tell our groups, good for you, bad for Egypt. Because some of these sites sometimes would have 10, 20, 30 groups at once, and the guys would be yelling and competing to get to the key areas to show this and to show that, and you'd have to yell and scream. And now we can go and we have the sites to ourselves. We can take our time and show things that tourists don't normally see. So, yeah, the advantage is for the people to go to Egypt now with the Kemet School. And that website I think you've got up there is www.chematology, spelled KHEMITOLOGY.com. And that's the Kemet School. That's who I'm involved with. And that's who runs tours. And we can run tours with large groups of people or with small groups of people. Nowadays, it's been more small groups of people. As I say, there was a time, Rodney, where at the Valley of the Kings, where everybody would go would see the tombs, of course, there would be 20,000 people a day. Same on the Giza Plateau, 20,000 people a day. And these sites were open virtually, not 365 a year, because the summertime is so hot, few tourists would go to Egypt. But for 10 months of the year, and for peak months, 4 or 5 months of the year, 20,000 people a day, bringing in millions of Egyptian pounds, and almost millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars a day at each site, 14 major sites. So you can figure how much money they were making per day in the 90s and 2000. Now, you're lucky if you see 100 people on the Giza Plateau tours per day. Maybe a couple hundred. Wow. Maybe. Used to be 20,000 a day.
Cool.
So that's how tourism has died for these people, the poor people of Egypt. I mean, it's terrible. It's because of these revolutions, because of the nonsense that's politically going on in the world. And I can say it till I'm blue in the face. I say it on Facebook every day almost. Egypt, it's safer in Egypt than it is anywhere in the United States. I mean, I live in Colorado. This is actually dated now, but I used to say this a year or two ago. It's safer to go anywhere in Egypt than it is to go into a Planned Parenthood in Colorado. Of course, at that time I was saying in Colorado Springs, one was shot up and people were killed. So Egyptians don't carry guns. Guns are outlawed for normal Egyptian people. The only people who carry guns in Egypt are criminals or the military and the police. They're battling ISIS, but they're battling ISIS way out in the Sinai. It's nowhere near. None of the sites are dangerous. I say it over and over and over again. Egypt is safe. People don't have to worry about being in any danger. Again, I've gone 21 times in almost 25 years. I've been involved with leading or co-leading 19 different tours. Not in any of that time has anyone in my tour group or myself especially felt any danger or fear that anything was going to happen from any Egyptian person or any crazy Muslim or whatever people want to believe. The overwhelming majority of Egyptian people are moderate Muslims. Less than 0.1% are extreme radicals, and most Egyptians love tourists. They can speak many different languages. Hakim could speak eight languages at least, and 8 to 10. And they love tourists. They love Americans. They've always separated. They don't like what's going on with our policies with Egypt and with Israel and all that, of course. But Egyptians have always been very sophisticated people. They separate people from politics. They don't blame individual people for what their government does. So even in the height of the Iraq War, like in 2004, my wife and I were on a boat, and we're going upstairs to go into one of the shops, and the man has Al Jazeera on the Arabian network showing American planes bombing in Iraq, killing people in hospitals, women and children. This Egyptian man is crying, and he's cursing Americans, and he's cursing what the Americans are doing, and then he turns to us, and we're Americans, and he smiles, and he offers us tea, and didn't identify us with what was on the TV at all. But that's what they could do. So, again, I'm saying it was safe. It's always been safe. It's safe now because there's a military dictatorship. I mean, the military has a strong presence in Egypt. Everywhere you go, you get military convoys, military escorts. There's always security, armed security with you, plainclothes security wherever you go. So there's never been any danger to me or to any person there. And I've gone off by my own, out by myself, hung out with Egyptians in their homes, and let them know I was a Jew, and even being a Jew I never threatened in any possible way.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, here's a question that I'd like to ask of my guest. Have you had any paranormal experiences or any crypto or UFO encounters?
It would take the rest of the week to me to tell you. I mean, the rest of the year to me to answer that question. But yes, this is why I'm caught in between in the UFO field. I was a follower for a long time. I first saw in the day the Earth stood still, the original version in the early 50s with Michael Rennie, and I thought it was true. I didn't think it was a movie. I thought it was a true story that aliens look like us, we're like the aliens, and now I say that the same thing. We are the aliens. But yet I've turned down the television show Ancient Aliens 4 times. The first season, the second season, the fourth season, and the ninth season. Why? Because they trivialize the subject. Again, to Hakeem, it's an insult to our ancestors to say that we couldn't have done things like pyramids and tours. But yes, have I ever had any experiences? Absolutely. One of the other experiences I had around the age of 8, where I had the same experience with the Sphinx, is I was born in New York City, in Brooklyn, raised in the Bronx. I lived in a 6th-floor apartment house. I used to like to go up in the summertime at twilight, at dusk, go up on the roof and just look out towards Manhattan and look out in the sky. Well, one night, I distinctly still remember this today, 8 years old, I looked out in the sky and I saw 3 lights in formation. 1 light followed by 2 lights behind it, heading across the sky they would be heading towards Manhattan, so they'd be heading south, north to south. And I looked, and all of a sudden they made a complete 90-degree turn and went back the other way and disappeared. About 8 years old, all I could say to myself was, those are not airplanes. Those are not airplanes.
Wow.
Something was going on. So, yes, I've had first encounter experiences. Again, I was involved for a long time in the 80s and 90s with, we never called people abductees. We called them experiencers. I was with a group of people who had experiences, third encounter experiences. People who said they were taken aboard ships. People who say that things happened with them. And now I have a lot of different. I mean, again, it would take really the rest of our time and a long time to discuss it. We could maybe come back. I would even do another show with you to discuss it. But there's a lot of this has been the government manipulating people. The X-Files, done by Chris Carter in the 90s, and now being revived. It's actually being redone on cable, and they actually redone the show. They did a couple of movies with David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson. The X-Files actually got into that subject about hypnosis, and that there's different layers of hypnosis. A person could actually be hypnotized and say that they were taken aboard a ship, and they were worked on by aliens, little grays, Zeta Reticulans, et cetera, but then you find out that that's actually a screen memory that was put under hypnosis by the government, and there actually is layers and layers of hypnosis. Without getting into too much detail about this, I do believe certainly I know we're not alone, and I know we've been visited, and I know that we're certainly not alone, even in our own galaxy, maybe even our own solar system. But the idea, a lot of this has been manipulated, has been used by governments to manipulate and control people. And it's been a thing about fear again. The way religion started, as I say in my second book, is around the fear of death. There was no word for death in the ancient Cometian language. I will say it again. There was no word for death in the ancient Cometian language. They only said to go west or westing. They didn't believe that there was life and death were a dichotomy. There was only life, and it was only different changing of form. So they thought there was no beginning to consciousness, there was no end to consciousness. So religion comes around creating the fear of death. It is fear today how people are controlled, through the media, through government, through religion, through teachers, through education, through whatever. But as long as people are kept in fear, there will always be this us and them philosophy. There's Jew against Christian, there's Christian against Muslim, there's black against white, there's gray, there's brown, there's this, there's that, there's aliens and there's us. There's aliens and there's us. That's the biggest dichotomy. The aliens are separate than us. But my biggest thing that I've been saying to people of years is we are the aliens. If indeed beings came here and manipulated the so-called earth, ape-like creatures that were on this planet and created us today, we're still them and we're still us. And that may have happened, I believe, millions of years ago, not thousands of years ago, like some people believe, like Zechariah Sitchin believed, and a lot of people believed. This happened hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years ago, if we were genetically manipulated. But the fact is, we are the aliens. There's no difference. I'm certain that if something comes down in a ship and would reveal itself today for everyone to see, we would look just like them, they like us. Yes, there's different life forms, there's different type of forms throughout the universe. Life takes myriad of forms, many forms we know on this planet that have gone extinct, that are not in so-called physical form anymore. But life takes many different forms. But humanness is a norm, not an aberration. This is not a total aberration, this planet, that we're here and we're the only ones like this who can think and can think about ourselves or make statues to ourselves or make hydrogen bombs to destroy ourselves. This has happened many times. This is a story, a scene that has gone on from galaxy from time immemorial. There's a great teacher named Drunvalo Melchizedek who always used to say, God uses people to create people, meaning that, yes, so-called advanced beings come. And I remember the great film Contact that was written by Carl Sagan, that with Jodie Foster's in it, where when she finally comes to the planet and then she talks about the device that got her there, and they say, oh, we didn't build it. It was here long before we came. And that's the story. This is the never-ending story. What we're doing today has been done before. Again, in Hakim's teachings, which is so much like teachings of Buddhism and other metaphysical teachings, there is no time. So that everything that's in the past, everything that's in the future is in this moment. This is what all the great spiritual teachers, what Jesus taught, what Moses taught, what the Buddha taught, what they've all taught. There is only the now. Everything that is, everything that will be is in this moment. And so that everything is eternal. This has been a show, a movie that's been gone on and on and on and on, and we're just caught up in the play. If we think about the mundane, everyday life, the three-dimensional life, and think that's all there is, then we're just caught up in the movie. What the spiritual path teaches us, what all the great masters have taught us, is to learn how to look outside yourself, to go outside yourself, to look at your life, look at what's going on around, and realize that it is all illusion. It is all an illusion, that all we are is just vibrations, just particles. The Rosicrucians, who I was very much involved with, would not mention God, would not use that religious-laden term. They would use things like the cosmic or the divine mind. But basically, how the Rosicrucians described God is by saying all is vibration. And that's quantum physics. That's all it is. Vibrations. The great mystery of quantum physics today is how does everything that we see as the material created universe, everything we think as being created, how does that come from nothing? Because that's what basically it is, just vibrations, which are subatomic particles which we can't see, are so small they're beyond our vision. That's all life, it's all existence is just vibration. Well, the whole point of our discussion tonight is the ancients knew that. And that's why they knew that everything is vibrations. You can control vibrations. You can use vibrations. You can create pyramids that are 450 feet tall, that weigh 7 million tons. You can create an obelisk that is 110 feet long out of one single piece of granite that weighs 1,200 tons. We see a mother piece of stone in Baalbek in Lebanon that is one single piece of limestone, which is estimated to weigh 1,500 tons. We can do all of those things once we have that understanding. And we're to head that today. That's the message that Hakim left it. He wested in 2008. Yet, people ask me, do you miss him? Of course, I miss the physical presence. When he left, I thought my life was over. I still had a zillion million questions to ask him. But yet, he's been more with me today than he was when he was in the physical. Because one of his great teachings also is, there is no death. Death is an artificial construct. We think the body is all we are. And if people are religious, they think we have a soul. Well, there is an essence that is in us that has never been created and is never destroyed, that goes on, goes back to the universal pool of consciousness. So Hakim communicates with me every day, proves the point that there is no death. And so that's what all the great masters have taught. I mean, Christianity is based around the point that Jesus was unique by saying that to believe in me you shall not die. But really what he was saying is just follow me, not worship me as God, but follow my path of self-enlightenment, the path that I went on of self-fulfillment, and ye shall not die, because death is an illusion. It's hard for people to accept that, because the fear of death is what controls the world today. It controls world geopolitics. It controls people's actions constantly. Be in fear. Be afraid. And you can be controlled.
I feel the same about my dad. He died back in '92, and I agree with you. The body is not here, but his essence, his spirit, his whatever you want to call it, I know it's always with me.
Yes. Those that have lived in our lives who are very important with us are always with us. Always with us. I mean, that again in Harry Potter, at the end of Harry Potter, when he has the resurrection stone, and Sirius points and say, we're in here, points to his heart. Mm-hmm. We still remember those that were important to us, and they're still with us. No doubt.
Mm-hmm. But we're running out of time.
So that's really the basis. The basis of the teachings, the basis of bringing this all out, was not just to talk about a dead civilization, to talk about what these things mean, these pharaohs and these pyramids and these tombs. No, to understand that there was a teaching that came through this civilization that we see the material remnants of that civilization with pyramids, with sphinxes, with tombs, but there was a spiritual understanding, and that spiritual understanding eventually led to the religions we have today, but it is the basis of those religions. And it is the basis that says that we're all the children of the same mother. That things like skin color, nationality, language, they're all artificial constructs. All life is much more connected than it is divided. The labels, the divisions are artificial, and they eventually have to be understood as such for there to be the peace that humans look for, to be the understanding, to be the, we were in that age. Again, in literature, it's called the Golden Age. If people look about all the great writers and all the great poets, they talk about the Golden Age. Well, there was that time. It's not myth. Again, every myth had a basis in time and space as a true event. There were times where we lived thousands of years without any wars, without any God, without any religions, and people lived in total harmony with natural law and with the planet, and probably lived hundreds of years, which is the basis of the age of the patriarchs in the Torah in the Old Testament. Methuselah living 900 some odd years. Enoch, who supposedly in tradition is the architect of the Great Pyramid, lived 365 years, which is the days of the year, which is supposedly a function that's incorporated in the Great Pyramid. Well, I'm telling you, there were a time where humans lived hundreds of years, where we had all our glands functioning, all our senses functioning. There were no viruses, no bacteria, no cancers, no heart attacks. People laid down the body when they wanted to. Now, this sounds like pure fantasy to people that cannot hardly understand that. But if you read the Bible, that's what's there. That's what's written there. And Jesus healed the sick. Jesus raised the dead. But there was a time when many, many healers could do that.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, Stephen. It's been fascinating. I got to have you back on because I've got like 6 pages yet.
Yeah, and I didn't hear any questions coming in. If there were people calling in or any questions, but we can do. I'll come back for sure. We can do this again. Okay. I'm planning something very special right now. I'm involved with a major project to go back to Egypt and to do a full-length documentary about Hakim and how I came to it and chematology. And we're hoping to do that sometime this year and maybe be released next year. And you'll certainly be on the watch list, one of the first we notify then when that's going to happen.
Oh, thank you so much. And also, how can people, if they want to get a copy of your books or have any thoughts or comments or just want to reach out to you?
Well, all my books are under my name on Amazon.com or Adventures Unlimited Press. People interested in the tours, again, it's chematology.com, the Kemet School of Ancient Wisdom, of Ancient Mysticism. That's how it's written out if people just want to Google the title, the Kemet School of Ancient Mysticism, or just www.chematology.com. There are tours going on for the rest of the year. There'll be tours next year. As long as we can do it and continue to get people who are not afraid to come to Egypt, we'll continue to do them.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, Stephen, like I said, I appreciate you coming on so much, and we will work on something to get you on. And you have a good night. And
thank you. And I'm glad we could work out these technological problems and just go back to the good old telephone.
Sorry about that.
That's pretty amazing, though, huh?
It is. I was like, I'm trying everything here, and then I was like, oh, I can't even Skype now. What?
But what was great is that you were professional about the whole thing. There was no panic. There was no panic on my side too, because I knew we had this backup. So it got done. That's the important thing.
Yep, that's it. Well, sir,
all right.
You have a good
night, sir.
Hey, you too. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, that's it for us tonight. I want to thank Stephen Mehler for coming on the show, and thank everyone who took the time to listen in. I'd like to give a big shout out to the Vibe Radio Network and to Holly and Ryan for putting up with us. And also to the first responders and our men and women in the armed services, thank you for your service. Our guest for next Thursday night, April 27th, will be our amazing, hot and sexy author and editor, best known for her books on pop culture, sold in 9 languages and 82 countries, Dr. Hassel. She is also the CEO of Soul Arrow Entertainment, and we look forward to be on next week. Everyone have a good night, and I hope you enjoyed. Take care.
Napa know-how.
A Napa guy knows more isn't always better, unless we're talking about full-size vans. These beasts do more than get you from A to B. They have so much space a man can live in it. With shag carpeting, waterbed, and a sweet lava lamp, these mobile abodes have all the comforts of home. With quality parts and plenty of Napa know-how, you can keep the original tiny house running longer, stronger. That's Napa know-how.